Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla Ancrum. I am the author of The Wicker King and Darling, which are my two thrillers. And my masterclass is about increasing tension. Um, Before we get started talking about just like designing your plot and how we're going to ramp up like the emotional reaction of your readers, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about being a plotter versus being a pantser. It's something that a lot of authors have their own really intense opinions about. And I myself am a plotter, so my advice is geared mostly towards people who also plot and mostly help people who do that as their style of writing books. So pantsers most often have an idea, and they have an idea of what they want their characters to be like. They have an idea of what they want their story to be like. They have an idea of how they want their readers to feel, how they're going to market it, and then they start the story and they just start writing. Like they're off for the races. Plotters tend to figure out what they want their characters to be like, figure out what they want their just general story to be like, and then write really detailed outlines before they begin writing anything at all. I have a lot of issues with organization, so in order to keep myself on track and to actually finish any of my projects, I have to do really, really detailed plotting. When it comes to designing thrillers, especially thrillers where they're kind of like geared more towards contemporary audiences, being able to increase the tension within a scene or throughout the entire book, it's a lot easier to manipulate that directly when you already have a plot. So what I do that works really, really well for me is I actually do several types of outlines before I begin my book. My first outline is just a general plot, just what happens, beginning, middle, end, all the details in regards to what I want the climax to be, what I want, just the story to be about. The second one is a analysis of what I want my readers to feel. I want them to feel a certain way at the beginning of the book. I want them to feel a certain way towards the 25% point, midpoint, climax, end. And then I do a character development analysis and how my characters are growing and changing throughout the story and like what their narrative journey is. So this will concern the second outline of the way I want my readers to feel. For The Wicker King and Darling, there are kind of two different things going on in those books in regards to the tension and the way that it was designed for them. Darling is a Peter Pan adaptation, so the readers are approaching it with an understanding of generalized source material. They already have their personal idea of, what the characters are like. They have previous associations with the Disney intellectual property, and they're coming already from a point of knowledge into the story. Whereas with The Wicker King, brand new author, it was my debut book, they are walking into a world in which they know nothing, they know no one. It is my job to hold their hand through the entire process of meeting these characters and seeing what happens to them. So for Darling, I wanted to design the reader's experience to bring them something familiar so that they recognize where they are walking into. And they're like, okay, yeah, I expect that, all of these things are going to happen in the beginning, and then slowly bring them further and further away from what they were comfortable with and what they knew. For The Wicker King, instead of that, I decided to focus on domesticity versus intensity. So I introduced the book as kind of like a, classic high school domestic contemporary, and then just kind of pulled the reader away from that experience towards the point of the book where it was clear that it was a thriller now. It wasn't actually just like a contemporary novel. So one of the things that is kind of very, very basic for you to understand about thrillers is the increase in pacing in comparison to a lot of other books. I think for some thrillers, they're like kind of just two basic designs. One in which there is like basically a jump scares every other chapter, or like, with that intensity, and then like a giant jump scare kind of near the end that the characters have to work through. And then there is something that's more what I designed for my work, which is like a gradual pace towards a climax, spike climax, and then gradual resolution for that. So I actually write very short books. My books are designed to be read in one sitting. They take roughly between 3 hours if you're a speed demon to 4 to 5 if you do regular paced reading. So the experience of dipping your toe into the story and then having your emotions stretched out to that like intense feeling in one sitting is something that I've designed specifically for that. Whereas like the other style might work better for books that are a little bit longer, where the reader will open it, read it, go somewhere else, pick it back up, and they want that like, that jolt for every couple of times that they come back to the book, and that works really, really well for that structure. So I'm going to start with Darling and talking about the way that I designed the tension in Darling. So Darling is about Wendy, who meets Peter Pan and decides to go on an adventure with him. She meets the Lost Boys, she meets, whatever. Like, it's pretty classic plot. I designed it as a chapter-by-chapter adaptation. If you've watched the movie, you have a vague idea of what happens in the book. If you've read the original book, you know exactly what happens in Darling. The way that Peter, who is the main villain, is shown to be a threat is entirely designed through the other characters' reactions to his actions. For a villain, you can have an active villain, you can have a passive villain, you could have, a Machiavellian villain, where they have like a bunch of plots that they're doing and everybody knows that they're so dangerous. With Peter, I really wanted him to be a character where everything that he is saying and doing is relatively innocuous, but people are flinching around him. They are really sullen when he walks into a room. People who are talking and happy just stop talking. Conversations that were bright before he came in just kind of dissolve in front of him. He says like, "Oh, don't do that," in a really soft voice, and people react like he yelled it. Like, those are the kind of things that if you just enter a scenario with somebody that you don't know, a group of friends, and all of the people in the group are doing that, that's terrifying. Doesn't matter if that person is doing things in front of everybody. That by itself is terrifying. So the experience of Wendy in this book is a growing general miasma of dread. So when Peter eventually does do something, not only is it expected, but the reader, because this is about designing this for the readers to consume, the reader has the experience of being rewarded for being able to pick up on the fact that Peter was dangerous, but also being able to understand that Wendy's reaction to his action when he does do something that's really frightening, which isn't to react really like, "Oh my God, I'm so surprised," but kind of more be like, this was the thing that they were flinching from. This is the thing that everybody's been worried about for this whole time, is really, really satisfying to, readers who are on this adventure. And the eventual climax and the eventual twist of the book, which I've been told is relatively surprising, feels like it was like you've known all along and that you were just rewarded for your ability to guess. So which is actually a quality of writing a book that's significantly more similar in the mystery genre, but also does have a strong place in the thriller genre. That rewarding the reader for being clever is also something that's relatively important to thrillers. I don't know how many of you have read a thriller where the twist or whatever is happening, they didn't give you any information for you to know that. There was just the writer just surprising you. There are no facts you couldn't have guessed from the beginning, and it's like, what is this? I'm sure we've all seen it on television shows where it's like, you gave us nothing. There was no way that we could have known that was going to happen. Whereas in slightly better written shows, it gives you just enough information that if you pay attention to patterns and if you are aware of the genre, you'll be able to kind of figure it out. And it's satisfying if you are a habitual consumer of this type of media, which a lot of people are. And I think that it's important while you are designing a book, if this is your first kind of debut into a genre, to respect the genre conventions, because your readers will be most familiar with those genre conventions, and they have consumed enough of those books that they're expecting certain things, and if you don't give them at least a little bit of what it is that they're expecting, because they've chosen this genre to fulfill what they've expected, it's not going to be reviewed very well, basically. I learned that trying to publish a contemporary science fiction novel, and everybody was really mad at me. So do not do that. Learn from my mistakes. For The Wicker King, there is a concept that I'm very, very interested in called Ma. It is a Japanese concept that is described as kind of like a pause in time, an interval, or an emptiness in space that allows life to grow. A lot of you may be familiar with Miyazaki movies, Studio Ghibli movies. They use Ma as a like a storytelling device. There are pauses in Spirited Away. There are pauses in Princess Mononoke that kind of give you, the viewer, the ability to kind of collect yourself, think about what you've watched, think about what's going on within the story, and prepare yourself for more escalating tension later in a way that makes the movies feel very real, very atmospheric, and just special in a way that a lot of Disney movies don't, because Disney movies mostly, especially like, Renaissance era Disney movies, didn't have a lot of Ma at all. There wasn't a lot of, just looking and staring at the sky, riding on a train. That has purpose. For The Wicker King, my form of Ma was domesticity and domestic scenes. So scenes of them hanging out with each other, playing video games together, sitting on a couch somewhere, drinking on a roof and stuff, playing in the park, walking in the woods, just, having these moments where they're just kind of being with each other and talking to each other and living together. And as the book progresses, the amount of domestic scenes decrease, and the intensity of the rest of the scenes increase. So you start out the book, with this kind of like slower pace, like, one tiny, event, another tiny event, but more about them just kind of like living. And then by the time you get, I think, halfway through the book, it's like 2 scenes domestic, 2 scenes intense. And then when you're getting to the end, it's just like intensity, 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 intensity. And it really like brings you, as a reader, to this point where you have this like unbreakable tension about what's going to happen, because you used to be able to kind of like breathe in between circumstances, and now it's relentless. So the way that the reader feels, regardless of what the plot is, you can control that by controlling, Ma within the story. So for the actual like pacing of the book, I like to put my plot and then put my like reader designed feelings next to it, and kind of like chunk out the book in certain ways to make sure that the pacing fits what the plot is delivering. I think that there are a couple of different kinds of like climaxes or like twists that you can do at the end. There is kind of classic climax, like, there's a murderer, they've been murdering, that there's a murderer to run away from, and now the murderer is chasing the main character, oh no, and that's the climax of the book. Or there can be kind of like a shocking twist. For Darling, it's a shocking twist, a character that you didn't think did something, or a character that you knew did something but did something really, really worse, or circumstances just weren't at all what you thought, or it turns out that the main character is an unreliable narrator and they are the cause of the problems all along. When it comes to your resolution, readers expect a certain amount of time between learning about the climax or learning about the twist and the book ending and everything being resolved. For a shocking twist, I have learned that they require more time to process that. If you do a shocking twist and then it's like, oh no, shocking twist, they defeated the villain in the end. They're like, what? I didn't have enough time to process what happened. Like, I didn't even, tell me more about what's going on with that character. Like, I just need more. And they will all say that in the reviews. Whereas kind of like a general climax, you've been waiting for the murderer to come chase the main character for the whole book. You know that that's going to happen. How they defeat the main character or the villain is slightly more important than the fact that it's happening at all. So you can use a little bit less space. But generally, shocking twist, a little bit more. General climax, a little bit less. I would say 40% for a shocking twist, 30% of the book left for a general climax. So I'd say like a really basic recipe for this structure, the introduction, 10%, probably like a little bit of a clue as to what's going to happen throughout the story. And Darling, the mom, Wendy Darling's mom, talks about meeting a boy that, did something very disturbing when she was young, and it makes her uncomfortable and makes her less comfortable with, Wendy making friends with strangers and just going off and doing her own thing. In The Wicker King, there's a scene where like they have like a really uncomfortable like friendship moment with each other where you're like, that was kind of inappropriate, and it kind of sets the scene for their entire inappropriate relationship throughout the entire book. But you have to give them a little bit of something, a little bit of a kernel to like keep them. So after 10%, you get that. 25% is where things need to start escalating in regards to your tension, whichever way that you're going to be designing it. I think that if you wait a little bit too long, then 25% from the beginning, people will be disinterested. There's always a point that everybody considers DNFing a book or, just not finishing it. If there's somebody who enjoys thrillers a lot, they haven't gotten a kernel of, what potentially could come in the future. They haven't started to feel the eeriness, the miasma of dread. They'll be like, oh my God, this book is dragging so long. Like, I don't know, even if it's only been like 50 pages or so, they're going to expect that. And that's a part of the genre conventions. Midpoint of the novel, I think that the reader needs to be at a stage where they are trying to guess who is creating the problem, whatever the problem is. If they aren't at that point, most of them feel like this book is confusing, even if there's nothing confusing about the plot. They'll be like, I can't guess it. I don't know what's going on. I've been reading for 200 pages and I haven't been rewarded, from the genre conventions, I just don't get it, and they might stop reading the book, basically. By the time you get to the 75% point of the thriller, they should be reasonably certain of who the person who's causing all the problems, the antagonist, is, regardless of whether they are right or wrong. They should, either be able to guess or be pointed towards the person who you want them to think did it, basically. And also be thinking of ways that they themselves would be able to avoid this circumstance, defeat the villain, figure that situation out. They should be at that point around 75% of the way through the book. Or if it's a story that is trying to teach a lesson, they should be seeing what's about to happen and be like, oh no, it's about to go really badly. They're about to do a thing that's not going to actually help the situation. But they need to be kind of at that point. Twist, if it's shocking. General climax, 30%. They're fighting the villain. They're learning what the twist is and dealing with the emotional outfall of that twist. And that's the general, feeling of the structure of escalating tension. I think that, and I'm going to talk about each book separately and about how I worked through this and how I balanced certain elements. In Darling, there are, there's obviously Wendy, Tinkerbell, Peter Pan, there are the Lost Boys, there are some other kids that Wendy meets throughout the night. There are a lot of characters, just like there are a lot of characters in the original Peter Pan. But for Darling, I really wanted the feeling of the book to be very Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, very casual teens hanging out in the dark, having a Euphoria-esque night, running around, neon lights, that sort of experience. So I wanted to maintain elements of that, just generalized young adult fiction genre along with the thriller elements. So I balanced the general miasma of dread that the book has with comedy. So Wendy's very funny, all of her friends are very funny, the circumstances are very funny, and in almost every case where things are getting to a point where you're actually enjoying them hanging out at night, it's immediately interrupted by Peter Pan doing some stuff that ruins the environment, because he is disruptive to their social structure. Just him being in it is disruptive to their social structure. So, as the reader is experiencing, tension, experiencing some of the frightening things that Peter does, experiencing the children reacting to him with terror, experiencing him being threatening in a way that could be misconstrued for not being threatening, there is comedy. People are saying things like, oh my God, it's really weird that this is happening. Does anyone else think it's really weird that this is happening? And everyone's like, yes, I think it's really weird that it's happening. There's just this kind of, comedic aspect to it, alongside a romance. So that reliable element of young adult fiction, we're hanging out at night, I'm experiencing what it is to try to be more adult, I'm having this, fun, clubbish experience, and, I'm just making friends and being free, and I met a cute guy, and we're, gonna do this and stuff like that, and having the character experience that with this overlay of dread is it heightens the intensity of the dread itself. Like if she left and it was like, okay, she's immediately in danger, everybody's scared, Peter's doing stuff left and right, and it doesn't really feel like anything is growing, anything is changing, anything is, anybody's slowly becoming aware of anything. It's just kind of feels like almost like a slasher, but as you can see, the kids around Peter acting like kids and trying to enjoy their night and trying to, live with him in their midst, disrupting their social circle. It really feels worse that this is happening to them. And I'm trying not to give any spoilers because this came out like 3 weeks ago. But at the end of the book, when things are resolving, when they fix that situation and they're going towards the happy endings that I have in all of my books, not that thrillers need to have happy endings, but I like them. I really wanted the reader to feel what it was like for the same social structure to exist without the villain. That these people are way better off without them there, that there's that love and that family and that protection and that, community that was on the periphery of the entire book is richer, better, more fulfilling for these characters now that the villain is gone, because that is the reward at the end of the action, novel. They've all gotten their princess, they've gotten their family, they've gotten their reward. For the Wicker King, a couple of things about the way that their lives are built increased the tension for readers of two different age groups, because I know that this book was going to be consumed by a lot of teachers and a lot of librarians, and also by children, basically. So The Wicker King is a story about two boys who are being viciously neglected by their parents and their community. Their needs are not being met. Their education needs are not being met. Their housing needs are barely being met. Their, emotional needs are barely being met. Their, food and goods needs are barely being met. Their mental health needs are not being met. And they're just kind of like flowing through this reality where both of them are doing an excess of labor for the other one in a way that absolutely depletes their ability to do self-care and ability to be aware of the depth of their own suffering. Because the topic focuses heavily on adults not being there for children when they need them, the experience of a adult that is in a position of care reading this book is stress through watching other adults see circumstances that are clear cries for help and ignoring them or punishing them. So there are some scenes where the main character starts setting fires. He's casually doing drugs. He's starting to get into fights. His grades are slipping, just things like that. When you're told at the beginning of the book that he gets good grades, he's relatively well liked, he, tries really hard, he, has this kind of persona where he's keeping everything together. And whenever he does one of those things, as his mental health care is beginning to slip, he's sent to detention, people yell at him, he gets sent to the principal's office. It's a situation where nobody's really looking at him and being like, oh, do you need help? You seem like you need help, other than the children around him who have no structural power or, they have no real ability to impact that situation in a measurable way. And as an adult, you should know that teenagers and children should never be solely responsible for their own protection and care, because they're children and they need their community to support them, and they need their community to enrich them and protect them. And this is a situation where that wasn't happening, and these are the issues that happened because of that. When you are a teenager reading The Wicker King, the experience of seeing things go wrong and seeing other teenagers in the book saying things about it and being like, maybe you should consider this, maybe you can consider that, but the main character, who's an unreliable narrator, is talking to the reader being like, oh, this is fine, I can handle this, I am a caretaker, I take care of my mom, I take care of Jack, I take care of myself, this is not a problem. The stress of being unable to impact any of what's happening is very much mirrors a lot of experiences that teenagers have in real life when their friends are going through struggles, whether it's, domestic struggles or, substance abuse struggles, and that, just general like ache is something that is huge to the tension experience of The Wicker King for teenagers who are reading it. One of the other things about the expression of ma in this book is that the ma that includes adults who are caretakers for them is very much one in which they are clearly reaching out for what they're lacking. So there's a moment where the main character is spending time with his mom, who has catatonic depression. So she is a parent that is there, but she is not an active parent because she can't be. It's neglect, but non-malicious neglect, basically. She just has mental health issues. And, he is just soaking up her attention. He is soaking up, the experience of her combing his hair, the experience of her doing the maternal things that she is able to do, because that is, a rich expression of love to him. And when you're an adult watching that, you're like, oh my God, this kid is not getting what he needs. He's not getting what he needs, And, he's so desperate for it that it's just like, I wish I could do something about it, but I can't. So there's that, inability to handle that. And then for teenagers reading it, they kind of sense the unfairness of that circumstance, and they're just like, oh, thank goodness he's getting a little bit of, what he needs. And then when it's followed up by one of the more like intense scenes of, the actual drama, there's this, oh wait, that's not enough kind of reaction to that circumstance that is like this kind of rolling tragedy that, it's like a rolling tragedy between the ma and the intensity that just kind of like rolls you up towards the climax of the book, which is them, setting a factory on fire and going to jail. So it's very much a situation where it feels almost kind of like you're on a seasick journey, rocking back and forth between somebody not getting enough and somebody doing something in response to not getting enough. But like I said about the way that I kind of design my books, they're designed to be consumed in one sitting relatively quickly. So it's still just kind of like a gradual progression up towards the climax of the book. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the other kinds of thrillers and how you can design that, mostly from a reader's perspective. I do think that as a creator, the way that we read changes because we write. You learn kind of a couple of different ways to read books, whether you're reading for pleasure, or you're reading for, learning or something, where you read it to pick up on the way that the book is designed. Not, oh, this is what the plot is, this is how they put all these cool things together, but more like, this is how long it took for this to happen, this is how long it took for that to happen, this is what they did, which made my reaction be this. If they hadn't done that, then my reaction would have been something else. You kind of learn how to look at that in that way when you're a reader. I've read a decent amount of middle grade thrillers, because I love middle grade work, adult thrillers, and a few young adult thrillers. And the design, where you kind of have like a little bit of, jumps of climax to kind of keep your reader interested, does something that I think is really different from what I do for my own work. And it's not so much that I don't do that format because I don't think it has value, or, it's just not, to my taste. It's more, I'm trying to do something different. But if that's a format that appeals to you, I think that it's important from this masterclass that you learn a little bit why that format works really well. So I mentioned that it works well for longer books when people are putting the book down and walking to go do something else, and kind of processing just general plot. I think that works really well for action thrillers and crime thrillers. I think that the experience of, your main character who is a sleuth, or who is, in charge of figuring out a dangerous mystery, or who is a, police officer, or who is, some kind of detective, or it's their job in some way. the experience of having them a new body turn up or a new clue or their life being put in peril is very like it makes it feel like the excitement of the book is like a almost like a character in of itself. The bodies turning up, the villain that's off screen, or the person who you think is, you know, creating these problems, being somebody who is continually creating issues as opposed to somebody who has done a lot of stuff and is now reaching the consequence stage of the things that they are doing. I think that works a lot better for that other kind of plot. So if you're writing kind of like a fast-paced, high-intensity, perhaps fight scenes, maybe sci-fi adjacent kind of book, this works really, really well for that. And similar to my kind of like rolling intensity experience of writing, there is kind of like a little bit of a gradually increasing part of that. So if it's like a bunch of murders, which a lot of thrillers are, so I'll go with that as my example. Generally, like the first murder is the most, you know, it's something that really catches your eye. I don't know, somebody exploded in an elevator where there was nobody else ready to shoot them. It's something that really catches your attention. You hook onto it and you're like, ooh, that's intriguing. And you're like, wow, that's unusual. The one after that is to let you know that the danger is still present. So it tells you that as a reader of a thriller, that this is not going to be a thriller where that is the one action that is done and you're working your way towards figuring out what happened with that one circumstance. It is that is the introductory event that pulls your character into it, and the rest of the book is going to be filled with a similar level of danger. So the way that, sorry about that, the way that the structure for that is that the like deaths, murders, bodies, or whatever, they have to be different enough that it doesn't feel like, oh, you know, they killed another person the same way, they killed another person the same way. So you actually can manipulate the way that your reader feels about the danger situation and the proficiency of the main character and their ability to figure out that situation. Based on the kinds of disasters or murders that happen. So generally, and this is going to be so broad, let's say there are, 6 murders throughout this book or something. First one, grandiose, you're hooking the reader. Second one, the danger is still present. This is not a book where, this is eventually going to, they're just going to figure out what's going on with the first one. This is a ongoing issue. Third one, surprising. You want to continue to intrigue them. They know that the danger is present. They know that this is going to be continuous. Now you're seeing either more information about the villain. You are learning about, their background. You're learning about their methods of killing. You're learning about, what their goals are and what their, MO as an unsub is. And then the fourth one is usually one that the hero is in danger. Because if you have all of them where it's affecting other people and the communication with the villain or the direct impact of that never touches the main character until the climax, the intensity of the danger kind of decreases because it's like, okay, well, you're never going to be a victim. You're never going to be in contact or direct, danger with the villain. So, I need more from that. So the last ones are always directly involved with the hero, whether it is something where the person who's creating the problems has changed their MO and is like, okay, well, now I know that you're looking for me, so now I'm going to start pursuing you. Or if it's something where it's like, you are now my MO, and I just didn't, the main character just didn't think about it, like somebody who watched a bunch of, blonde people get killed and they didn't really think about the fact that they're blonde. They're just like, I'm just the whatever. And they're like, oh wait, I am blonde. And like, no, so that moment is the moment where it's like, okay, the stakes are even higher. We're getting closer to the climax. If there's a shocking twist, like the main character is literally the killer and they're just pretending to look for the killer, you learn that early on. All the stuff starts unraveling. You get the reader, understanding what's happening, figuring out how, that situation is going to be resolved, trying to guess what's going to happen in regards to the resolution. If it's a general climax, they're being hunted and stuff, and they're like, okay, you know what? We're not doing that anymore. I'm going to home alone my house and murder this guy. Like, that's when they start putting the stuff together. Last 10% of the book, they defeat them. Then there's the resolution of what happens afterwards. But generally speaking, that's about how that structure would look. For thriller novels that are designed to focus on one major event and then drag through, what happened with that, and like you learn more information, the like multiple climax aspect of that is not necessarily focused on like violent events. They're more focused on exposing twists. So kind of a little bit like Clue, where you get a certain information in the beginning, you witness a party, you witness, the murder, something happens. And then based on your experience, because it's usually like a third person limited or, first person, perspective where you don't get much information other than the information that you just witnessed, you slowly are calling your reader's attention to individual details of what they witnessed or the information that they've been given. So, if they're at a party and they see somebody drop from the balcony, and it's their task to go figure out what happened, then they go, meet this person who you saw them, take a drink from on a little platter or whatever, and you realize that though the narrator noticed that their tie was askew, it might actually be because they weren't actually working for the people who worked for the party, so they made their own waiter uniform because they were secretly. It's like that. So basically, I don't know if anybody's interested in Father Brown. It's an English mystery thriller TV show about a priest who solves crimes. Literally every single episode is designed like that. So I highly recommend, if you're trying to design your thriller in that way, learning that like formulaic design from television, which uses this significantly more than books do, is a really good way to kind of teach yourself how to design that. So as you're progressing towards your climax, which is the reveal of the person who did it, or the reason why it was done, or the fact that it was an accident, which is always a really fun one, you are having your readers put together information about something that they saw that they are gradually forgetting information about. So when you have a scene in the beginning of a book and it's like, this is the scene that we're all going to have to reckon with for the entire book, or this is the, experience, the violent, experience that the main character saw, there is this, very similar to real life, this thing that happens where as you are reading, the reader is forgetting certain details about it. So when you bring their mind back to other details, you're doing two things. One, providing a twist, an additional kind of like a jump of a climax to keep their interest, but you're also reminding them how fallible their own memory is and making them feel like an actual guest to the circumstances within the book. So they are kind of like self-inserting into that circumstance because of their own experience with trying to figure out what the mystery is, the murder is, or what's going on based on their own faulty memory. And you are holding their hand through that experience. So I am unsure whether we can do questions, but I would love to elaborate on anything that I haven't already elaborated with. And Madeline, do you know if people can put questions in the chat, or if it's just kind of like they can't comment on it?
Oh, me too. Yeah, so anyone on Facebook can put a comment and the there. So I watch on YouTube that might be live.
All right, cool. So I do have one from Hope Shores, and it says, you know which plot points to pare down or cut to drive the end of the story with a lower word count? Yes. I think that there are certain things about the way that characters talk to each other in the beginning of the book that you can escalate through paring down dialogue. I think that dialogue is the easiest thing to cut down word count. Most of the time when you're doing like a murder scene or you're trying to describe the way something looks, taking away words that allow the readers to envision certain things doesn't help nearly as much as going through your manuscript and being like, okay, can you say this phrase in less words? Or can I cut this sentence that's not as important? Or is this conversation bringing things forward? Or can I just put in a detail that allows the readers to learn certain things about the circumstances that they would not otherwise have gotten? There is a part in Darling that I removed. I didn't do a lot of removals for Darling, but where the main character spends a little bit longer in the car talking to her parents about how she wants to go and hang out with her friends and run around in the night and stuff, which is the reason why she decides to go with a guy who broke into her house, because her parents have been telling her for multiple days that she is, too weak to, do too simple to, take care of herself. And she's like almost 18 and she's just like, I just want to hang out with people in the night. Like I am almost an adult, but she, talked to her parents for a decent amount of time in the beginning of it. And I decided to cut that entire conversation and instead put in like a 2-sentence line about how, about how she was talking to her dad about like, oh, I'm an adult. Like I am almost an adult. Like you need to understand that. And I think it took maybe 2,000 words out of my manuscript and it was really helpful. I think that with the ends of the stories, villain speeches, I would say, for people who write thrillers, it's really fun to have the villain, make some histrionic kind of declaration about what he's feeling, what they're usually about what they are feeling, what they are doing, why, all of that stuff. I think that when you get to that point and they're being defeated, most people want to read about what the villain was wanting to do and read them being histrionic and stuff. And it really has this feeling like, kind of like when you're watching a TV show and you're like, okay, so the hero is just waiting, listening to them say this stuff instead of just like punching them and taking advantage of the fact that they're distracted. Like the readers will feel that as well, unless the villain's like end speech or something is directly related to their defeat, I would guess. But most of the time it's like a histrionic before they get defeated kind of speech, and then they get defeated and the hero is just like, there you go. You could usually cut the villain speeches when it comes to that. Also, a lot of people tend to cut like resolutions. I like to have kind of longer resolutions. I like my books to all have happy endings. They're incredibly stressful. I'm writing for children. So a lot of the times people will just kind of be like, and that was that. And she looked, over at his body and he was like, yeah, and that's like good enough. I think that readers react relatively similarly to longer, and then she went home and was so happy that the tragedies were over. They react like kind of the same to that, as well as the, she stood over his body and then the book just ends. So I think that that's also another place where you'd be able to cut any additional stuff. Does anybody else have any questions?
I can ask a general question.
Yes.
Where I was interviewing with different agents, and they get a lot of questions basically querying tips for the writers. So I was wondering if you had any related to reviewing thrillers.
Oh, yes. I think... So I queried for about 5 months before I got my my agent, who was Amy Tipton. She's now retired. I think that I really started getting some traction when I started thinking about my books not as like art and more of a product, as bad as that sounds. I think that when you think of your work as a product, your ability to sell it increases significantly. I think that when you are thinking about it as art, what you're trying to do is seduce another person into your vision and into your world, which sounds appealing. Yes, like that's what you want your readers to do. That's what you want from your readers. But agents are looking for a product that is easy to sell and worth the effort to sell. So when you are talking about your book, it's really, really good to talk about, yes, comp titles. They don't always have to be books. I almost exclusively comp like TV and movies because that's the way that my books are kind of designed. And also to talk about the readers that would like your work. So I have a book coming out. It's a train heist thriller about a bunch of girls who decide to rob a train. They live in an economically disenfranchised town. One of those, like, there was one factory and then the factory closed down towns. We all know what that's like. It is bad. And there is a train that goes through their town from Chicago to New York that is a luxury train, and they decide to rob it. And because they're all economically disadvantaged, they're like, okay, we don't want to go to jail. We don't want to, have all these problems because we've already got problems, which is why we're robbing the train. So we're going to rob it without weapons because armed robbery is like 30 to life. Without weapons, it is a year. So they're like, we can do this. And then they get on the train, and the train is being robbed by like adults with weapons, by mercenaries, So now their new goal is to get off the train. The train is a Christmas train. Okay. So when I was querying this book, I pitched it as a book that makes teenage girls feel the way grown men feel while watching action movies. And then I said the marketing season for this book would be winter because the people who would be purchasing books for teenagers who they know, like to read would purchase this. So I think that the main consumer, like, yes, would be the teenagers who are reading it, but more, I think, adults trying to purchase books for children. And then I said that the majority of Christmas-themed books that exist are usually romances. They are usually contemporary. They are usually just, this specific kind of thing. Being able to have a action book that has like a really, girls working together kind of slant and stuff be coming out around that season would really, really stand out amongst the competitors, and it would appeal to both people who are looking for, a contemporary experience and people who are like heavily into like, intense action thrillers with a lot of stress and the twist of we're going to do something intense because we're teenagers and we're trying our best and we're smart and we're creative and we are totally going to get that money versus, oh my God, there is an actual class of criminals that have been doing this at a level in which they are significantly more dangerous than we are. How are we going to use our gumption and our smarts and our girl power to escape with our lives and also defeat them is a very like marketable slant. Then on top of that, especially because of what's going on right now, because I pitched this in, I think, 2019, so this was still kind of like, a thing that was going on, TV and movie adaptation opportunity. So I said, we'll make teenage girls feel like the way men feel watching action movies. Christmas thriller, that's uncommon. And then, my final one was, in regards to adaptation, people are looking for stories that fit popular conventions that we've had a lot of before, which is the girl power, type of film that they design for teenagers and for women. Very like comedic, bridesmaids, comedy sort of thing with another layer of you can commercialize this because it is a commercial action property. So that is what I sold as opposed to focusing on, this relationship between all these girls and how they grow and change as people and, the found family and some of them are LGBTQ and, there's a spooky twist and the spooky twist is such a secret and like all of that. I literally was just like, this is a product. This is how this product would be sold. This is how I would sell this product if I were you, which makes you think that it might be easy to sell as a product. So that's the way I handle all of my queries is just to market my stuff as products, and it works really, really well.
Yeah, that's really, really great advice. I was just trying to think when I first started querying because I switched agents a couple of years ago, and I remember with the first agent, I had a manuscript that was young adult science fiction. Like the only sort of marketing thing I did in the query letter was say it would appeal to fans of Orphan Black. And that was just like my one sentence of marketing in my querying. But then when I switched agents and when I began writing YA thrillers and I was pitching those, I can't actually remember if I put anything to do with marketing in the query. So, but yeah, what you're saying, it totally makes sense, because you're right that we are producing these books and they're going to be viewed as products by like the publishers that buy them, because it's got to have some sort of like commercial potential for success in order for them to offer them. So yeah, you're totally right. And that was just really fascinating and intriguing, listening to how you approach that, because that's like a completely different angle to querying. But I have not done that. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I do. I actually went to school for a really specific kind of marketing. It was fashion merchandising. So my background is in marketing, and I handle basically everything that I do as an author in that same way. And I do think that one of the things that a lot of self-published authors have talked about is the difference between marketing to a publisher, marketing to like adults and librarians and people who will be purchasing the book post, publication, and also to teenagers who are your readers, and about how you have to handle each one differently in order to get the best results. I think the way that you market your book as a product to publishers is not the way that you should be marketing it to readers. I think that when you're talking to readers, talking about your book as though it's art is the most important, just in general. And also for people who are specifically writing a young adult fiction, making the decision to talk directly to parents, teachers, and librarians is a really important and powerful way to connect with that audience, because a lot of teenagers have disposable income, which is one of the reasons why young adult fiction is so profitable. Because, I mean, yeah, they might make $10 an hour, but if all 10 of those dollars are going towards books and not bills, there you go, But when you're talking to, like, teachers and stuff, like, they'll order 6 copies of your book, 10 copies of your book, 12 copies. They have the ability to purchase in mass. They have the ability to, bring your product to people who will invest it in a certain way. For the Wicker King, which was a very grassroots release, like, yes, it was my most profitable and most, popular book, but incredibly grassroots, very, very low budget, bottom of the mid list. And I wrote something about it specifically geared towards librarians, and somebody who works with the Chicago Public Library was like, I will definitely go and see if I can get interest in this to purchase it. And like a lot of my early sales were just libraries and bookstores. And that was like a huge thing for me. For readers, I kind of really dug into the, like, this is the experiences of the characters. This is what I wanted to do, to enrich the current discussion about this problem that I wanted to talk about. And that was really appealing as well. I think that for thrillers, everybody knows that they're going in to get a thrill. They know that it's going to be spooky or, violent or what have you. So you don't have to really sell them on that, because that's why they've chosen this genre. They're looking to find what else there is in this property that makes it, or this product that makes it worth their attention, worth their while. Because there are so many books about, a serial killer that a grizzled detective has to, defeat or whatever. But if the grizzled detective is a 65-year-old woman with grandchildren who's in a small town trying her best, that's what'll bring them to your book, and that's what'll, bring them to your doorstep as an artist.
Yeah, it's really interesting listening. It makes so much sense. And yeah, like you're totally right. Like, very different marketing to like adults who are going to be learning sort of like more involved than teenagers who we're specifically writing for. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the other questions that came through the age a lot, because you've been really good at answering questions. I know that querying writers were wondering about how to make sure that their opening pages hook an agent in, because they were like saying that the query is very important, but also like the first 5 pages. So do you have any advice specifically on that?
Yeah, just for the record, so that people know, I don't write a lot of short stories. I'm not somebody who, kind of built their way up to writing books. I've always just kind of written books, and I only recently started learning how to write short stories because everybody needs to understand that authors also go through learning curves. But I recently wrote a science fiction story for a book called Tasting Light that's probably coming out in, I think, 2022 for an anthology. And I understand that for a short story, making sure that you get the most impact out of the smallest amount of words, kind of like poetry, is one of the most important features of that. I think that when an agent reads your query, they're understanding a couple of things. One, whether you're good at doing instructions, just at all, if you have followed the instructions. And you'd be surprised how many people don't. So please do. Second, from your professional writing to them, they will understand whether or not you are capable of behaving professionally in the environment as a person who may have to directly market your own work. And then also they are understanding whether or not you are capable of writing something to appeal to a complete stranger, because that's what your books are. They are trying to appeal to complete strangers who don't know you, have no reason to support you other than whether or not your product appeals to them and fulfills their need. So the first pages, once you've gotten past the query letter and they're like, awesome, I'm going to open these pages, like, yeah, I trust that this person won't make a fool of themselves in the public sphere. Like, your first sentence, really, really important. And I'm going to actually pull up mine for this so you can kind of understand what it's like to write a sentence that really just kind of like pulls people in. Before I do that, I'll kind of tell them a couple of pages. So in the first 3 pages, the readers have to like the voice of your main character, just like how they talk. Just like, know that is set in like and they kind of, they know what the circumstances are there. And then also you need to have them care about that person's journey. So let's see. There we go. So for a person who there's a doing a live video that people who are that is a lot of clients request rain. I've gotten used to having a wet collar. You now understand this is a working person. They're like a door dasher. They, are dealing with environmental circumstances. They are in a scenario where they are directly experiencing weather and other people are deciding that they want that weather. So they're, clearly at a certain level of capitalist that they are in a relationship with somebody who has control over what it is that they're doing, that their discomfort doesn't necessarily matter, but that they've accepted that because of their own circumstance. Instantly you care. 2 sentences. It's like 12 words. So that alone, they're hooked, they're interested. Now you have a little bit of leeway to, I'd say, mess up a little bit more. So if you're not super perfect at the dialogue, you're not super perfect at, all the rest of that stuff, they already care about your character, they already care about your circumstance. You get a little bit more words to kind of make up for that. But by the time you get to page 3 or page 4 or something, you have to get them to feel the rest of those feelings that I mentioned, that they care, that they understand the circumstances, that they like the character's voice, all of that. I would say, as somebody, I don't necessarily like this book. If you have anything else, please send it my way. Send it to their way, okay? They're not saying no. They're saying the way that you write, the way that you hook me, your professionalism, everything about, what you're bringing to the table as a client and as somebody who is an artisan producing a product is great. I just don't like this specific thing you made me. I can tell you're a good cook. I don't like Brussels sprouts. I don't think that most people like Brussels sprouts, but you can cook vegetables. So if you make some nice, roasted broccoli, marketable. We can market that. So I think that, when you're writing a query letter, when you're trying to design yourself, you're not only selling your product, but you were selling yourself as a creator and you were selling yourself as a professional. So I think that that's something that's probably the most important part of that design process.
Yeah, definitely. And I love the example that you gave because you showed just how much you can really pack into a very small amount of words, really. And especially when it's the opening sentences that are really going to hook in not just your readers, but like any editor or agents that you send it to. So, yeah, you've really got to kind of do the maximum that you can with those first sentences, which was exactly what you showed there. So, yeah, like we are coming up to the end of the time now for this masterclass, and you've been amazing with this, Kayla. So thank you so much.
And thank you for popping in and asking me some questions. I was a little too succinct. I really appreciated it.
So yeah, thank you so much for joining. If you're watching this live, we have another full day of events tomorrow on the Saturday. And all of the panels, masterclasses, interviews, and readings that have been broadcast so far are available to watch again on the YouTube channel. So thank you.